Today's podcast is about a fellow energy industry colleague who's African and resides in the motherland. Tare, energy commentator within the oil, gas, and renewable space from Zimbabwe, has a wide global exposure and currently in South Africa, where he lives and works. Tare runs a platform named Future Wattage, where articles centered on electrification, carbon capture, blockchain's effect on the future of energy, and much more are discussed. I was introduced to Tare last year during the pandemic by a mutual friend from South America, who believes we both could be the future Africa needs. Before I continue, I'd like to acknowledge the support of PaySub Invest, a global financial advisory and wealth management firm based in Germany and France. If you're looking to create generational wealth and understand how to manage your finances, do contact the PaySub Invest team on www.paysubinvest.com. They offer services to individuals and corporate bodies alike. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome you listeners to the BlueSitron Podcast, where we discuss lifestyle, culture, and more. Tare, tell our listening audience, how did you end up in the energy world? Was this something you've always wanted to do?
Cool. Thanks, Bim. And first of all, thanks for for bringing me on your pod. Much appreciated and excited to have this conversation. So I think if I'm to be honest, I don't know if I can say it's what I always wanted. I don't know if anyone can say that about anything usually.
Yeah.
If I'm to be honest, but then I think the way it was that I think I always kind of wanted to be in some form of financial work, economics. But then it sort of with time it sort of modified itself based on sort of getting a better understanding of my own strengths, versus what I thought were my strengths, because you know how it is when you're growing up, you've got certain things you think are what you're good at, if I can put it that way. But then as you develop and if with the right exposure, and sometimes even with luck, I would be honest, you fall into certain places that allow you to sort of discover what your actual strengths are, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
So I found that having had exposure to certain people, to certain bits of information, I got more and more drawn into liking the energy space because it felt quite natural with a lot of the things I enjoyed myself. So economics, which at its core in a way is probably a bit of a social science of sorts, and I'm quite interested in understanding society and understanding how people think, how people make decisions and that kind of thing. So I think it was very nice to sort of find somewhere where economics is present, finance is present, because oil is at that time it was in the oil and gas space, and oil is the highest traded commodity in the world. So you find that it's got a nexus with many forms of understanding finance, understanding economics, understanding, and it's fundamental, right? It's being used, so it's not a pie in the sky type of situation.
Absolutely.
And then and also another big important thing that I liked about the energy space is its nexus with geopolitics, with understanding the endowments of countries, the endowments of what's there already, and that's pure chance, right? No country plans where it's going to be. So those kind of things where it brings to the entire picture of energy. It's very multidisciplinary, so it makes it quite a fun space to be in. So whether you're coming from a finance, economics, coming from a scientific space, environmental science, everything, it all sort of mishmashes into there, which is something that I really like, because it means that it's a big scope for learning, and I'm still learning. In fact, the learning probably won't ever end. And I think if I combine that with that, the time I entered the workspace in 2008, that's when the global financial crisis was happening.
Oh,
So because of that,
what a time to enter the workspace.
Exactly. It was a tricky time to enter. But what was fascinating for me, because I was doing finance at the time, is that the finance, you're being taught finance, and then this craziness is happening. So I kind of got a bit disillusioned with the world of finance and how it actually works and what is real. What is real in the sense of, is the market real? Is the versus the economy?
Is it just made
that
up?
kind of thing. Exactly. So I think going through that also helped me go towards energy, because I felt like at least energy is, it's fundamental. It's not, there's no debate on, how energy works. Well, kind of. There's always a debate as science progresses, but we know what it powers. We know that all the development energy has come with. We know that even eating food is transfer of energy, so it's everywhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of how I ended up there. So if to answer your question, I can't say it's something that I always want to do, but it's emergent. You kind of get better attuned to your strengths and what you like learning about, and then I found it easier to then gravitate towards energy as a space.
Yeah, that is, thank you so much for that. And you're quite right. Energy is broad, and it is multidisciplinary, as you say, and we can literally study anything right from the get-go, but then as time progresses and as we grow, as we develop, and as we see that the fundamental core of the things around us is impacted by energy, you start to wonder and you start to think, oh my God, this is interesting. How does this happen? How does this work? What is this about? And you did mention something. Oil is the most traded commodity in the world. And, very interestingly, it is something that is being talked about a lot these days, especially on the energy transition, but we're going to get there. Before we do, you tell us about future wattage. What's that?
So it's another, as we are saying, emergent, and it probably is a word I'll use a lot, because in a way that's how a lot of things happen. They just, you start it and then you want it to take its own shape as it goes on. But basically, I used to enjoy writing articles on LinkedIn. Just, some people would reach out to me saying, no, and I found that article very useful. I'm not in the energy space, and, I hear all this stuff about what's happening, but I just don't have somewhere where I can sort of get a summarized type view and a simplified view, and at the same time, a decluttering of the noise. As you can imagine these days, there's a lot of news out there. We're basically stimulated with news almost every other time. We are basically on screens every other time. How it is. I think we're actually maybe the time we're on screens is less than the time we're not on screens, right? Because it's maybe only when you sleep, either your laptop, your phone, or your TV. So I think because of I would just do that on LinkedIn, just write, get some feedback, and in a way, I guess, to be honest as well, I technically also used as a way of also on processing my own thoughts about what's happening. So even if no one read it, I'll be like, this is maybe for me as much as it is for anyone else who just stumbles upon it. So I think as I was doing that, then I think sometime last year, I think I just decided, well, if I want to continue doing it and even do it on my own terms, why don't I just make it my own platform site, and I'll see how it grows and develops there. So that's when I moved. I just started it as a website, which my hope is that as I put up more articles, as I bring in more collaborators, and by the way, we are open to bringing in more collaborators, with good, well-versed opinions, and it's not about, and I'm trying to bring in a multiplicity of views, but obviously in a balanced way. I think that's what my main aim is with the platform, to say, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot to declutter. You're hearing many things. You're hearing, as we're saying, you hear blockchain is now in energy. You hear,
exactly.
You hear smart grids. You hear the world is ending. You hear so there's many things you like that. I think people not in the energy space per se would want to know, and even people in the energy space themselves, to just hear different perspectives. So sometimes even people in energy reach out to me saying, oh, I didn't know that's what was happening there. Because I think as our professional lives go on, we all sort of get funneled down our professions in a way that even let's say, I don't know what other profession can be put in. Let's say you're a doctor, right?
Yeah.
You're going to funnel down that path in terms of knowing what's happening in medicine, what's the latest journal, what's the latest disease science, but then energy will just be like that thing where you catch it when you catch it, So so I think the hope is that the site as it grows, and I've got a few ideas of things I want to add to it, including collaborators, but even other functions, which with time will hopefully grow. But like I'm saying, it's for me, what I've actually enjoyed about it is that it's an emergent thing. I'm seeing it as I go, and I think that's where I remember talking to a colleague at one of my professional body events, and I was like, I started this thing, but I'm still going to see how it goes. It's still very rough. And then he's like to me, no, we're starting it. If you wait for it to be ready, you'll never start it.
Exactly.
So that's what I like that response he gave me, because it made me like, oh yeah, actually, and for sure, because a lot of the things you now learn when you now do it yourself,
you learn so much.
Yeah,
absolutely, exactly.
There weren't things I was gonna learn if I was thinking of it. You know what I mean? You have to
you learn by doing.
Like you learn by doing, exactly. And it's said all the time, but you kind of take it for granted, right? Because you're always like, but of course, how else does someone learn? But you actually realize that that doing it is what teaches you, not the theory of doing it, which is sometimes
the practicality of it all. Yeah.
Exactly. So
interesting. Well done. So are you looking to future wattage? Are you looking to as it grows, as time goes on, are you looking to now make the platform, membership style, subscription style, as it grows eventually? Would people have to start to subscribe to? Have you thought about that?
I've thought about it, but I think as I've seen, right, it's almost a big part of it is still quite emergent. I need to, and this is the good thing about when you now own your own site, because you can see the statistics of who's logging on, where they logging on from. As the most of the people viewing it, in South Africa, they in Africa, they in Canada, they in Australia. It just depends, and also are they on mobile, are they on desktop? How long are they on for? Which pages do they visit? So I think because I'm seeing it that way, and it's still quite early in the phase, because I've also got a full-time job. So because it's emerging that way, I'm kind of giving it time to emerge and see how it goes, depending on a lot of these things. But obviously, if you're now thinking monetization, yes, you think of maybe subscription, maybe a platform that provides certain reporting and dashboards. But I'm really very open to it. And it's funny because that's how many things happen.
That's true. It all starts like this, and before you know it, it just and it always looks into something bigger.
Yes, and it always looks like you planned it that way, but usually, because even listening, not to say that my website's a Facebook, but I'm just thinking when Facebook had to decide how to monetize Facebook, right? It's not like they were always going to monetize it via advertising. That's actually something they decided when they saw the numbers coming in, and they're like, okay, how do we make this thing? So I think it always looks, hindsight is always the 50-50, where you're like, so then they planned to monetize it this way, but it's usually not the case. So I think for myself, I try to, because it leans towards a hobby, maybe it's a hobby slash a personal thing. So I'm pretty open to seeing how it exactly develops, as long as it sort of builds on those fundamentals that I say that I wanted to help people understanding the transition, help people make even investment decisions. And that's not also always necessarily investment decision in the context of like shares and stuff. Maybe sometimes someone is thinking, do I really need to put solar on top of my house? Do I need to buy an electric car? Is it worth it? Or is it a fad? Is it something that is just, it's nice to say and it's sexy in the world now, but is it really practical? So that's where I hope and thing. And then I think that's another big thing is you also hope that, especially given the high youth dynamic in Africa as well, that it also acts as a place for someone to almost like as a gateway into maybe the energy space and additional interest in the energy space.
That will be great. Well, good luck with that, Tare. Well done. I'm very proud of you, even though we've only just, been introduced, and I personally have learned a lot. I've been on the website. I've been on the website platform. It is a platform, but of course, it's morphing from a website into a platform. So I've been on it, and I would encourage any of our listeners that is looking to understand a little bit more about the energy world in a conversational space, and just giving us all insights, because as Tare also mentioned, there's so much information out there, and that just one can drown in information overload, and that's why people like Tare are putting this together. But you talked about investment, such as, solar, putting solar on your roof and all of that, and even, clean, let's just say clean energy. And that's literally the next question I was going to bring up to you is, what are your thoughts on clean energy in Africa? And do you think we are ready for energy transition amidst energy poverty? We do know that 80% of the continent still wallows in energy poverty, right? There's still, it's such a rich continent, but yet, so poor in many forms. And energy poverty is a huge one of that, because I do know if the continent gets out of this energy poverty situation, oh my goodness, that's just the beginning of paradise. That I can say for sure. So what are your thoughts on clean energy in the continent?
Yeah, I think a pretty loaded question as well. Hopefully I can do it justice. I think, first of all, Bim, I would actually want to say that what's been an interesting journey for me as well. Doing some school programs around energy itself, and seeing other how other countries have done things and that kind of thing. I think I used to really questions on the future of Africa used to really fill me with a lot of trepidation, I'll be honest. So when you ask, is Africa thing ready? It used to really I used to really hate questions around Africa's future.
Tare, you're not alone on that.
You know what I mean? Exactly. because I think, if I'm to be honest, firstly, I think, you kind of always have this thing where you're just like, man, can Africa's issues be fixed? The governance issues, the civil war issues, the colonial history and what it does to the situation and that kind of thing. And also being from Zim, I think, the situation that happened during my generation of being in Zim, which is the downturn starting probably from the year 2000 or so. It's one of those things where it's taken us, it's taken me. Let me not say it's taken me a while to actually realize that that process, it's a trauma, right? It's not sometimes we just call it it was part of life. This is what happened, but it's actually a trauma, and it ends up shaping a lot of how you see the world and how you see the progress possible. And it's easy to operate from a space of fear all the time because of those experiences, right? And seeing people lose savings, seeing people who were doing financially okay, all of a sudden it completely changes within such a short space of time. And I think and tied to that, because I think it's quite common, and you might even be able to tell me more, being from Nigeria, that we as Africans sometimes we are very academic about things, right? So we always
I feel so too,
we
I feel
always
so
joke
too.
with friends saying, I know, if you ask an African to diagnose, like, what, let's say in my case, like, the discussion around what happened to Zim is like, it's a forever discussion. People have so much analysis about, this is what happened. Oh, if this politics hadn't done this, you know what I mean? So because of those three reasons, I would say, I think, I used to really not enjoy questions about Africa because of that background. But I think as the more I've seen and the more I've kind of just my own personal exposure, so it's anecdotal if I'm to be honest, and seeing some of the I want to say not luck, but some of the things that created dynamic even for the successful countries. It's also happenstance based on the situation that is prevailing at the time. So some of it is not planned. Some countries just find wealth because they some of them maybe weren't even looking for it. So and then they just find it. They were comfortable operating a certain way, and then because whether there's oil, something that was found, or whether there's another thing, then all of a sudden it changes the entire landscape of what's happening. So I think it sort of helped me shift my own views on the change in order to actually to get Africa to improve. You actually have to look at what do we have. Okay, as in we've got things that we don't have, but what do we have? What do we have? And
I mean, we've got sun. There's more than enough sun. There's more than enough gas.
You see, what do we have? And I think for me, if I'm to summarize those things, and this will get into the question now of when you're saying, are we ready? Are we being? And in fact, you've actually just touched on it. But I think the important things that we see now that we have, and you can always choose to see it in two ways. You can choose to see it as a problem, or is it a solution for something that you have? So we know we've got a very young, big population in Africa.
That
we'll
is
probably
correct.
surpass China's population within this decade, meaning that you've got this base. And I think if you look at, and by the way, what I'll do actually, for any time I have to, I'll try and include some links. I'll send them to you. I don't know how you'll post them on the pod, but then just so that people can always have links to some of the things we say, that it's not just made up information.
Absolutely. I'll be happy to have that.
Great. Okay.
Absolutely.
So you'll find, if you look, there's some sites where you can see sort of the world's population, the population pyramids, and Africa is the only one with that that traditionally shaped population pyramid, where you've got the base of young people and progressively reducing, like a proper pyramid. Whereas every other place, even China, doesn't have that, right? They've got a relatively aging population now, even though it's a big population, but it's almost, even the US, even Europe, particularly Europe, it have that almost, I don't know, the best way to describe it is maybe like a Christmas tree shape, where you've got very few young people and a lot of the people are now older. So by definition, that the population is aging from when you see that. Whereas with Africa, we're probably the only continent
we're constantly young.
That's actually young. So what does so that means we've got big population, young population. What does that mean? It means you've got demand, consumer demand, that's going to come into the pipeline. If people are economically empowered, of course, and you've got supply of many things: labor, skills, ideas, innovation, which is very important for developing ideas. You need the people, and you need productive people. So that's something we have. And this growth in population, I think they say about by 2050 will have doubled in population theoretically, and about 2/3 of that will happen in urban areas. So what do we know as well? We know we're going to have a lot of people in urban areas, and that helps because urban areas are sort of a concentration of people, so you don't need to now go out, because Africa is very sparse, right? It's very expansive. So if you have to put infrastructure everywhere, it might be challenging. But if you know that you've got a large urbanizing population, then it can act as funnels of getting creative solutions done for certain things. So I think that's good. And then I think finally we've got this new Africa Continental Free Trade Area agreement, which went live at the start of the year. I think that's also very good. It's a very good step. I know it's still quite a challenge to make it do what it needs to do, but I think things are going
in the right direction, isn't it?
Exactly, because we live in a world now. We've got strong American power, we've got strong Chinese power, we've got strong EU power. You can't. It's very difficult to be at that table if you're not a sort of a combined market to force decisions. Yeah, if you try and do it as individual countries,
it's not going to work.
Apart. Yeah. Exactly, you'll be picked apart, and the challenge is that. Given the history, given everything, and history is also important here because we are born in a certain lifetime, so we kind of see transitions only because will it happen in my lifetime? But many of these things can happen over hundreds of years, and it's because we only live in a certain part for ourselves that we don't really see a lot of this change. But I think even the EU idea, right? It's not something we can directly translate into an African context, but we can use elements of it to make it work for us. Exactly, because you've got something where countries don't even need to like each other, to make this thing work.
To make
it's
things
just
work.
That we want the consumer market, we want the supply market, we want the skills market, we want the free movement of people, we want these kind of things that actually boost trade and boost the scale of the economy is involved. So I think and it's no coincidence that since the EU started, this is probably the longest time they've gone without a war, it's we've only got a little snippet of time here because this is our time. But it really does point to that you do need that economic integration to negotiate as a big powerful entity, and then to actually create development within. So I think I'm using that as sort of I think anytime you ask me a question on is Africa ready, what does the clean energy transition mean for Africa, for me those three sort of factors, I'm using those as sort of the pillars of why we can approach it a certain way, and there's probably more. And this is also not to say there's no challenges, but at least we're saying what do we have in our own books that creates a market, that creates a place that can trade internally. Absolutely. So in terms of being ready,
and language is a big thing, because I think one of the challenges we've had in Africa, of course, is that language barrier, and that's where the colonial history comes in. Of course, pre-colonial times, Africa was, it was an empire of its own, and then with the colonial situation coming in and Europe dividing Africa into bits and pieces and making people speak different languages, you would see the French speaking African countries just basically just do their own things their own way. So it will be very interesting to see the entire continent coming together, regardless of the language. We do know that English is a global language, whether people like it or not. That's the global language. That's the most spoken language. So it would make a whole lot of sense and positive stance for the continent to be able to come together. You mentioned something, you don't even have to like each other. We see that with EU. It's not like they like each other. Some countries do, some countries don't. We've seen that happen with Brexit, and when Theresa May was the prime minister, the poor lady had to I'm not sure if she ever listens to this. She'll be happy to hear someone call her poor lady, having to go to Brussels every time, time and time again. EU doesn't want this, they don't want that, and the British politicians don't want this, they don't want that. But, in the end, everything went through. Boris Johnson is the prime minister now. The whole politics aside, but EU works together as EU. And that even said, some countries are not part of the EU. For example, Norway. I work for a Norwegian company, as you know. Norway is part of the EEA, the European Economic Area, but not part of the EU. However, they do benefit from everything EU, but they also pay a whole lot of money to do that. But Norway can afford it. They are rich. Yes. They're one of those countries that came by oil. Maybe they weren't even looking for it, because if you look at the entire Scandinavia, Sweden is actually way hardworking, because those guys don't have a drop of oil. But they've got IKEA, they've got Ericsson, they've got all those industries that they have or had and probably still have Volvo. I think they've sold Volvo now. I can't remember. I have to check again. But, they had Volvo and they had things going on for them. But then Norway found oil. and then they became the Scandinavia power. Probably even, I don't know if they're the richest in Europe. Of course, Germany is considered the largest economy in Europe. But when it comes to the oil fund, Norway is top class in the world.
Yeah.
In the world. And we know where they are. Oh, actually, maybe I take that back. Either in the world, I don't know, with Saudi Arabia, but we know where the Norwegian oil fund situation is, in the sense that they are investing everywhere. And it's not just everywhere for the sake of investing, but basically solid things. Like they've got shares in Netflix and Facebook. They literally invested in Regent Street in London. That's the most expensive part of London. That's the most expensive part. And also probably Mayfair as well. So you can imagine all the expensive stores and all of that paying rent to the Norwegian Oil Fund, for a country that only has 5 million people. And why have I, pivoted and probably used them as an example is basically to then see that, yes, all the countries don't need to like each other, but EU is working for EU. So is AU, Africa, Union, going to be, going to do something similar, or are we still going to I mean, you know what I mean by something similar, in the sense that are we going to be able to come together, get things done, as opposed to saying, oh, you speak English, you speak French. We see that situation I haven't seen it physically, but heard of it, because I do have friends from Cameroon who speak French. They're from this French-speaking side, and then I have the ones that are from and then you have the ones speaking English. For goodness sake, how about just speak one language with your own, language, your own indigenous language, So these are the challenges you see.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I think also, if you look at, in many books of history and especially when you look at history in its time span, so rather than in its thing where you look at it for the last 50 years since African countries became independent, because that's in the context of history, our time now is a drop in the ocean, right?
Exactly.
In fact, even the US itself, which is our generation superpower, is been there. It's a 350-year-old
300
country,
years plus,
which is very short. But I think what also is evident in sort of seeing history is that, when people trade, it also facilitates a language of its own. It can, language can evolve to match what's happening. So I think without that combination, when you're cut off either by artificial borders, by, official languages, if we can even say that should be a term, official language. But when you've got that dynamic, I think there are some parts of the world where, certain regions, I think I was reading somewhere where they're saying that in certain parts of Russia, where Russian traders met Norwegian traders every winter for certain products. I don't know if it was winter or summer actually, but they developed their own particular language. It was actually in a linguistics book. And the story of, I think it's a story. I'll also give you the link to these thing. It's a story of human history in terms of language and linguistics. And I think that's one of the things that's mentioned, that because these guys, you then found a few certain, say, Norwegian language in the Russian languages, and then you found Russian in the Norwegian language, but of particular people, not everywhere across the board. But this was because you had these guys who were trading particular goods that would meet and had to communicate about the quantity of fish they want or whatever it was. So trade in itself facilitates a changing of the landscape. But if you don't even trade, you almost have a boundary, a division that is sort of put upon you that makes you not be able to trade with someone who you should naturally trade. You will never get that integration, because French and English can work together. It's not a thing, or even an African language, another African language. There just needs to be something to mediate transactions, and people will develop their own language for trading. So, and the obvious, some of these things don't happen over like 2 years, 1 year, they take a while. But I think, especially now that we're in a world that's digitally, very digitally inclined,
it should be easier now, isn't it?
Exactly. So the question just is, do you open yourself up to the exposure of trading with someone? Because as we're saying, we've got a continent that will double in population. which means the consumers are here, right? The consumers, people who are going to need laptops to learn new skills are here. People who are going to need electricity are here. People who are going to need, property are here. People who are going to need roads are here. So the people are there, and that's why, when you speak of is Africa ready, for energy transition, it's one of those questions that I feel like, kind of similar to what I was saying about the site, to say, especially when something is abstract, it's different when you're told, Bim, you've got an exam tomorrow. Are you, your readiness has got a deadline, if that makes sense. So your ability to assess your readiness is due to that. You've got you've got a goal and a time. At 12 tomorrow I've got an exam. Am I ready or not? Let me read. And the readiness is forced upon you, whether or not ready or not. Fuji said, the thing comes. Whereas with a lot of what we go through now in terms of energy transition, that deadlines are abstract. There's no one saying, on the 20th of thing, you have to be ready for energy. So you're only gonna ever be as ready as you are. No one's ever gonna shoot a gun to tell you that, no guys, go, you should be ready. And I think in that regard, we've got stuff to work with, right? We've got, as you even mentioned earlier, we've got the land. We're quite, it's quite an expansive continent. You've got, the high irradiation for solar. You've got, you've got wind we've got a long coastline. So, wind is available on and offshore as well. And technology is improving at a pace that is allowing us to even do micro solutions where we possibly couldn't before. You can put up microgrids for solar now. You can put up, battery storage is improving. So that rural village might actually not need to have, a power utility create a big expansive network. It can do a micro solution for the particular area, those kind of things. I think the reality is just that we need to get economically empowered, because that is sort of what helps in terms of even, as things like climate change gather pace, you're gonna need, climate change just generally affects the poorer worse than it does, and it can't be isolated to the person who's doing the changing the climate through whatever they're doing, whether it's through coal, whether it's through fumes or whatever emissions are going out into the system. So I think even pragmatically as well, we need economic empowerment to help us with this thing, because we are what maybe we're 20% of the world's population. I don't know if my estimate is right, but emissions wise we've always been very low, right? Because industrial, we
have been low, exactly, significantly low in Africa even.
So I think as we try and address that, we do have we do have an incentive to be ready, if I can put it that way. So our readiness is incentivized, rather than are we ever going to get to a day where we say, are we actually ready? And some of these things, like you mentioned, solar, in terms of irradiation availability, we take that as a given because we're here. But as we said before, just like Norway, you find oil and all of a sudden your life changes. And it's just there. You didn't. You're not superior because you found it there, because it was it was just there. And a lot of world development has approached things this way. It's been by happenstance because of things that have happened, because of maybe at a temperate climate, so agriculture does better naturally for the plants that are and animals that have been domesticated and that kind of thing. So it's one of those things where we now also just need to look at what do we actually have, what do we have, and how can we use it, because the economic power of it can usually trample on certain divisions that are sort of artificially created, if I can put it that way.
Wow, fantastic. That's really good stuff. Thank you, Tare. Really good stuff. I had another question, but I think it's something we've already talked about. It has to do with 70 to 80% of sub-Saharan Africa population still experiencing this high level of energy poverty, and we do know that there would be a lot of economic growth from electrifying the continent. There's something that's we have been doing in the continent, and that is receiving investments from the West. That's a very broad situation. I say that because it's almost like wealth or riches is taken from the continent, taken to the West to fix up, and then we are then borrowing from the West to then refix whatever. But anyway, what can Africans, right, within the energy space? You and I, we're Africans, and we are within the energy sector, and we're young, and there are younger people even coming in, people that are just leaving universities, and people that have, probably left university maybe 5 years ago. Even a lot of women are also coming into the energy space. Is there anything, as young people in the industry, is there anything that we can do to turn things around in terms of this investments from the West? Say, for example, the Africa Development Bank, is looking to actually, I don't want to use the term being bullied. That's a rather, I don't want to use that term, but maybe being told to reduce investment into oil and gas, projects, maybe even more of gas projects, right? And this is based on the fact that the AFDB has some they have some partners, European partners, basically, that have a stake level of percentage of ownership within the bank. So they're having that sort of coercion from that side. But we do know that there still needs to be a lot of investment to go into production of fossil fuel. Let's look at the clean one now, because gas obviously is the cleaner of the two. I don't even think oil production is going to cease just like that. It's not going to. Yes, it would reduce. Yes, the oil price will be impacted. It's going to fall or go down, at least decline. But gas is the cleaner version. And to be fair, we do need the funds from this fossil fuel to then be able to power other forms of energy sources, to be able to invest rather other form of energy, the cleaner, so-called cleaner forms of energy sources, the hydrogens, the batteries, and so on and so forth. And, storing of carbon, that is, emissions that is captured during, production phase. So what do you think the young people within the energy space can, what can we do? Can we turn anything around? Because I don't know.
No, another loaded question.
I know.
But I think I think we know for a fact that anything about anything regarding the transition in Africa is loaded. There's no running away from it. I think we would be doing it a disservice if we didn't acknowledge the complexity. I think so. So I see it in a few ways, right? I think. Firstly, that so as you pointed out, there is no doubt that well, at least in my mind, that we need energy in order to economically transform the continent, right? Energy is an enabler. And the thing is, it enables two critical areas for us. It enables commerce, just like almost directly, industrial activity, everything of that nature. And it also underpins technology, and not just technology in the sense of smarter ways of doing things, but just purely saying that if we want everyone to be connected online, if we want our youth to be able to compete in the world for, say, online software development jobs, just as an example, which can now be done from anywhere, whether you're developing an app for someone in South America, in China, in Australia, you need, your laptop must be charged, right? So it underpins everything in that regard. So the way I see it, especially when it's sort of starting with what your earlier point, that money still has to come from traditional powerhouses. I think the reality is that you've got a situation where, this is also a bit of opinion, so is that you've been having a sort of a disconnect between how financial markets and fundamental economies work, right? And there's many reasons for that. We've got we've got people investing heavily into, the stock markets and that kind of thing. We've just had a big impact in the sense of COVID, but we've bounced back in terms of the stock markets by and large because of what's happening, at a central bank level across the globe in the big economies, because tech companies are doing so well, and tech companies in the world now almost disproportionately affect stock markets, right? Because your top 5 big stocks, Apple, Facebook, Google's Alphabet, all those guys, just by, if they move, they tend to carry the whole index. So it kind of sort of changes the fundamentals of the connection between the real economy, people making stuff, people, people having infrastructure, people being able to go to physical jobs. So there's a bit of that disconnect. So why I'm bringing this up is because for me, Western investment is kind of going to be inevitable with where Africa is going. Personally, that's what I think, because you've got a situation where the fundamentals of that, we have the numbers, right? We've talked about the youth. We've got a market. We've got an addressable market, and a lot of fundamental growth in Western economies. A lot of it has been absorbed. It's almost saturated. That's why those economies now grow at 1% if they're lucky. Thing. Of course, it can change. It's not a hard fast rule. Something new can happen. But what it tells me is that those growth rates that everybody obsesses about, 7%, like the sort of growth rates people saw in China, Africa has that available and will have that available. So it's going to naturally bring in investment. So it might become a situation where it's less about saying, should we take money from the West or not, given our history, and we know our very complicated history with Western money. And the IMF and all these guys, but ultimately, for the money system to keep working, this capitalism machine to keep working, it's gonna need to find a new place for growth. And for me, Africa is one of those places, naturally, because of what we've described, the numbers, the urbanization, tech making things cheaper and easier. People are going to start, because a lot of these things are exposure oriented, right? The reason why a child in rural Kenya is not coding is not because they don't know how to code in terms of their intellect. It's because they've not been exposed, right? Yeah. Exposure is very important, and this is where we'll start going, in my opinion, at least. So because of that, like I feel like even with what countries like Norway are doing with their Nord Fund, Norway is a bit different. You pointed a lot of out. They found oil in the 70s, struck it rich. They're very low population. A lot of the electricity is hydroelectric anyway, so they're not even really using their own. So they've really stacked up their money because of these happenstance. They've taken advantage of their geographical lottery, right? So now the Nord Fund is now trying to invest into helping the energy transition in developing countries because of because their wealth was built on that, and we know that things like climate change disproportionately affect, but we don't have to sort of be reliant on that structure, that thing, that what can you call it, that charity, if we can call it that. I think personally,
because it does feel like that sometimes, doesn't it?
No, it does. But I think naturally we are going to actually be an investable business case in the coming years, and in a way we are hoping that economic mass of what's happening is what will then drive the sort of structures we need. So anyway, so back to your question where you're saying, what does it mean for, like, what can young people do? I think much like any solution, especially in for something very complicated, and I think climate change probably ranks as probably one of the most complex issues humankind has ever faced, because we talked about economics and finance, that are, some of them are misaligned between different groups. You've got the impacts that are also misaligned. The person who's emitting the most doesn't suffer the most, that kind of dynamic. Your change of weather, Africa still, there's still a big leaning towards agriculture and food insecurity. So, if there's a drought, you're more impacted than someone who's not experiencing the drought, or somebody who's got the finances and the bank to slug through that sort of difficulty. So I think what it will take, though, is that in each of our own ways, we'll probably have to have some sort of it's almost like I think it will be sort of a micro approach that emerges towards a bigger solution, almost like, you know how like when you start a fire, there's one fire there, and then it becomes a bigger fire.
Exactly.
Because when you try and, you know, burn the whole thing, it's very difficult, but a fire requires lighting on each different multiple spots. And I think we are developing the conditions. Of course, you know, there's a challenge that now we've had COVID, and I think COVID has really set us back in terms of globally, in fact, in terms of, you know, that poverty eradication. I think in the conference I was in, they were saying it's probably set us back 20 years. And, you know, some of the challenges that comes with, in terms of, you know, the impact on women and children, the impact on because, you know, when jobs on working poverty, which is actually a term I had never really heard, but it was an interesting
poverty.
term to hear.
I've not heard that before.
To say you're still in poverty, you're still impoverished, but you work.
Oh dear.
You know, so because you don't earn enough to exit poverty, but you are working. Yeah. And, you know, in Africa as well, we've got a very high
there's a whole lot of that
informality in our economies, and this is why I think that as we progress, these little fires that we're trying to start in each areas and create hubs of innovation and create the direction that I feel should naturally happen, you know, it still needs steering, but then that process of each person contributing their little fire into trying to, you know, help policy, help find investment, help, you know, the diplomacy towards saying, you know, guys, this transition should be just. It shouldn't be just that, you know, if someone investing says no, and natural gas, for example, and yet maybe that is the easiest solution for the people at the time. And then it can be phased out in a new phase, and, you know, or carbon capture technology improves, so that can be done. So I think people are going to have many roles, basically. You're going to have the people who are doing the thing, and, you know, and in a way you're trying to force the critical mass and the discussions that allow, you know, even for governments to see the benefits of this, you know, grows. So it'll be a journey. It will definitely be a journey.
It will be an interesting journey for sure.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Well, thank you, Tare. Oh my God, I have learned a whole lot. I can't wait to get on to Future Wattage again, because I can imagine all the things that you've uploaded recently.
No, I think, and this is kind of why I'm looking for collaborators more and more, so that, you know, when I am not choosing to write, you know, someone can actually put something informed, because right now, you know, I tend to write when I feel like something is worth talking about, or something is coming up, and something is worth, you know, but I know, like I'm saying, I'm trying to bring it to your perspective. So if someone else wants to write, wants to the podcast, because we've got a section now for where I'll, like, even the conversation we're having now, I'm gonna put it up.
Oh, this will be there section. For sure.
Yes, and then, you know, even someone with a good exactly, people can, you know, bring it up. But yeah, so I think, you know, we are saying it is a journey, but I think, you know, it's important that, you know, we don't consider ourselves, you know, perpetual victims of, you know, the past. We need to actually look at what do we actually have in front of us. What can we take advantage of, and what can we, and some of those things might require levels of diplomacy that are quite challenging, you know, because you know, as we're saying, we're still not a unified continent in the sense of economic power. So each country has its own drama, each country has its own debts, which means that maybe it's in a weakened state to negotiate certain terms. But I think, you know, I think because, you know, of this dynamic that I was mentioning, that the capitalistic machine, if you can call it that, is going to be forced to look into Africa, because that's where the growth is going to be naturally. You know, population is for growth. It's important for manufacturing. It's important for domestic markets. I mean, not even for just domestic, for international markets as well. If you're making a product where you're going to sell it, you need to sell it to, you know, to a place where there's a lot of people, where there's a lot of young people, and a lot of even also what can I call it? A lot of people who are maturing in their economic position, because you can drive that towards a more service oriented offering. So and because of that, you tend to see that, when you see. Let's maybe I'll just use two examples, of things that I call a possibility. So let's say, and some of these were even mentioned when I was in this conference hearings. People trying to lean towards how do you create, these hubs, these innovation hubs, or these micro cities, because even a lot of the technology we see that that people are trying to create, and I know I don't want to lean towards the obsession of, say, trying to make a Silicon Valley. Everybody's like, we want to be the new Silicon Valley, but you don't necessarily have to be a zone that is a Silicon Valley. What you're just trying to say is, how do you use this population dynamic, this urbanizing dynamic, this dynamic that, I know, like when I drive around, even in older parts of the city, in Johannesburg, or even back home in Tare, you find a lot of old buildings, right? Old buildings that people, maybe during the 60s, they were being used for manufacturing, for textiles. So you've got some of this property sitting empty and derelict
and dilapidated.
Exactly. So, but what can it's in the urban area, so it's already sort of crowded in because the numbers are in the urban areas. What can you do with that space? Can you convert it into some sort of hub where people, and as we said, we've got this challenge where there's an energy deficiency, especially once you go rural, right? But if somebody can be taken from the rurals to be in the city, close to such a hub where, power is guaranteed, accommodation is guaranteed. So some of these things I feel like can naturally happen, and even now, because of COVID, a lot of office space is now also lying idle. What can be done with it?
Yes. That's a big issue. Yeah.
And then another thing is, say, for example, let's look at, hydrogen is like the new buzzword in energy as well, and hydrogen, EVs and stuff. And you see that one of the challenges hydrogen has always had, and it's even, I think when I wrote a an article, this was back in the LinkedIn days, but I transferred it onto Future talking about EVs. I think this is maybe 2017, 18. And at that time, one of the things that was always mentioned about hydrogen cars is that they are critical mass. To get critical mass is very difficult, because you need to put down the infrastructure for people to be able to drive to a hydrogen filling station. Yes. And then the cars must be there. But the problem is the cars don't happen because people want to first see the infrastructure or see plans that the infrastructure is going to come before they make the cars. So it's like a loop. And in that regard, certain people then believe that, say, for example, that Tesla, the Tesla type model, the battery electric vehicle, can be the only thing that will work, because it's now got the critical mass. It's got people making charge points. It's got cars being churned out, thing. But I think, if you start thinking of the microness situation, the micro, this micro citying, micro hubbing that we're talking about, is that if you're a country that does have access to energy to make hydrogen, or you already make hydrogen, why not think of a hub where you try and create this innovation cycle, and then you can become the place to come and see a hydrogen infrastructure. It doesn't have to be countrywide. It can be a part of a hub, right? You can say, okay, we're trying to make a hub or a corridor that specifically allows us to, one, build hydrogen thing, allows us to innovate the hydrogen car, because innovation is kind of emergent. It spins off as it develops. So you end up at a point that you're not even, that's not the point you planned. Like, you look at even historically people who made patents, they would say, this is what the product I've discovered is meant to be used for, but the use we use it for today is completely different, right? Because we discover new uses as time goes on. So I think we need to sort of do that crowding in that really takes advantage of, as we keep going back to, of the numbers that we have, of the market size we have, and sort of crowd it in using some, these are just, rough examples, but I, even just with my experience of seeing things like creating, these smart cities, these smart grids, it's things that are easier at a smaller scale. So why not try and make hubs that allow you to do that thing? And you don't necessarily have to be replicating Silicon Valley, but you're just trying to say, how do we create that, and how do we formalize it so that, we don't have a situation where 80% of our economies are informal, because what you lose through, informality, which we know usually it refers to things like, the governments are like, we're losing tax. That's usually the first thing they think of. But what you're actually losing more of is just, structured business and innovation. Because now, if someone is trading informally, let's say there's an issue with the product they've produced or the product they're making, the person at that level doesn't have any recourse if it does something to someone, you know what I mean? Or there's no, it's almost like, when you're in the drug dealing world, I suppose, the people, they can't really, if they have a dispute, they can't go to court, right? Because,
Exactly.
it's, you want the formalization in order to actually allow people to own their ideas and grow their ideas and scale them up. So I think with time, and as we try and pull this off in whichever way we pull it off, I think we'll be able to actually benefit in that way. We'll be able to actually formalization will be natural. That's what I'm saying. It will be natural if we execute it in that particular fashion. But as you said, it's a journey and it's a challenge.
It's a journey, yeah. Thank you so much, Tare. Maybe we need to make you our next OPEC president. And you can make things happen. This is so good. I've enjoyed every moment of this conversation today. It's been eye-opening, educative, and just thought-provoking even. So yeah. But I'll ask you just one last question. So because you're definitely coming back, just to let you know, we're definitely having another conversation. This is not the end, in case you think this is.
I hope the questions won't be hard.
Oh, don't worry. I'll go easy on you. I promise. So I have one last question for you. So tell us, who is Tare Kazura? Who are you?
You see, you promised no more hard questions, and then I think now you're gonna hit me with the when I start saying who am I, when I was one I did this. No, I think at the core of it all, I think if I find a way to summarize it and make it an easy answer for myself, is I'm just a person who enjoys learning. I think that's sort of been what defines the way I see myself. In that sense, that I really enjoy learning and being exposing myself to different things, and because there is a lot to learn out of the world, right? It's interesting, because the more you learn, I think the more some of these discussions we have, and we've touched on some of the topics, the more you realize how similar humans are in terms of just as people, how arbitrary a lot of the divisions that split us also are, because it's something that someone needs to come up with in order to create division, right? Whether it's a border, whether it's a language, whether it's a tribe, whether it's whatever it is, right? We kind of think. So I think that's kind of why I've really enjoyed the journey of being a curious person, being always enjoying to learn, because when you learn, like, you kind of you demystify a lot of things, and you you lose I don't know, I want to call it there's an illusion almost like an illusory nature of sometimes of sometimes the way we see the world, that if you're seeing the world in an illusory state, I always say to myself, the worst thing what I don't want is to chase an illusion, right? It's almost like chasing something you think is what you want because it's what I don't know, however you came up with it, or you're trying to address a shortfall you think you need to address, so you chase something and then you get it and then you realize, that wasn't really it. So because you were chasing an illusion of sorts. So I think what learning does, why I enjoy learning a lot, is it helps demystify a lot of things, declutter a lot of things, understand, some of these things, and you also end up understanding the role of luck in life, right? In things that sometimes, you're not always better than another person. You're just luckier because, you stumbled upon something. And of course, sometimes you create luck, right? Because by being exposed, but ultimately a lot of it still boils down to circumstances and what's happened and history. And so I think if I'm to answer your question simply, I'll just say I think I'm a person who just likes learning and sharing what I've learned. But I think the process is symbiotic. You learn even from someone who's not in your field. You learn
Absolutely.
almost equally as much, because they ask you questions that make you have to think a certain way. And it's no coincidence that, for example, you look in the world of economics, that one of the biggest strides that happened in economics, which is the discovery, or not discovery, but the fleshing out of behavioral economics that happened with Kahneman and Tversky, which was, they were psychologists, they weren't economists, but it's because their analysis was able to transition the bounds of the subject, because it changed, it turned a lot of what we knew on its head. So there's a lot to learn from each other. We just have to be sort of ready to demystify each other as people to an extent, because we all have experiences that are valuable, and that's why going back to what we've been discussing today, there's a lot for Africa to share, especially now in this globalized world, right? And we know things like tech are changing things so drastically. I'm sure you told me earlier that you've got a niece, and it still, I'm sure it still fascinates you. I've seen, at least with my own friends, and it fascinates us seeing how, like, even a 2-year-old now can operate a phone, right?
Oh my
right?
goodness, you need to see my niece. She's unbelievable. She's only 3. She's
exactly.
Unbelievable.
And so it's exposure, right? It's not that she just needed the exposure to be given thing, and you see that across the board, across everyone. I even see my own parents using, I never thought I'd get to a stage where they could properly, well, maybe let's not say properly, because maybe they still don't know most of the functions, but they know enough to work with on new modern phones, for example. So you want to be able to bring everyone, as you want to give people exposure. I think that's what it boils down to, and learning really helps with exposure. It like I'm saying, helps demystify illusions of artificial divisions that somehow as humans we are sort of naturally geared to create for some whatever reason. Maybe that's another discussion for another topic as well.
Yeah, definitely. And this is why you're coming back. Oh wow, thank you, Tare. Thank you so much. I think I'll definitely like to say I have a lot of respect and thanks to our mutual friend Luba Perez for this introduction, for introducing me to a knowledge powerhouse like yourself. So
oh my God.
A lot of kudos to Luba. A lot of kudos to him.
I was laughing at the word knowledge powers, because now you know how it is that it's an interesting process, because the more you learn, right? And it's funny because where I met Luba during the program, I thought to myself when I was doing that program, because it was an energy master specifically, and when I was doing it, I remember thinking, am I narrowing myself down too soon? Is it too specific to do energy masters? Why not do a masters that's more general and stuff? And then when you do it, you also realize, okay, even if it was even at this micro level, it's still there's still so many layers, so you'll never know it all.
Exactly. Because, you'll never know it all. Exactly.
You actually learn more what you don't know, right?
Absolutely. Oh, wow.
The concept of what they call the anti-library, not the library, the anti-library. You value your book collection based on how many books you've not read, not by how many books you've read. And it's usually more you've not read more than you've read. Yeah.
That is so true. I've got loads of books in my house. I haven't read half of them.
So that should be your measure, not how many books
dear.
you've read, but so you always don't know more than you know. Almost
That's
always.
true.
So I think that's the interesting thing of the knowledge learning journey. But yeah, it's fun. I really.
But we keep learning. We keep learning every day, even not by book, by talking, interacting, live, and in different forms. We just learn. We're constantly learning as humans. So, and it's not just a case of just learning, but it's also knowing that you're actually learning passively, even.
Yes, exactly.
So that's the interesting bit of it. But anyway, Thank you so much for your time today, Tare. This has been amazing. Oh my God, this has been amazing. And I would like to thank our listeners as well for, enjoying today's conversation, for enjoying and also learning a little bit more about the energy space within Africa, and also knowing what obtains and the challenges and ways that we can approach it, ways that we can make things better. And that's obviously in several ways, by learning, by opening our minds, by interacting with other countries within the continent, and of course even outside the continent even. So yes, thank you so much, Tare. There was so much to learn from you today. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I also learned a lot from you. So it's always mutual.
Exactly.
I think, and that's what makes it fun. So
yes,
thanks a lot, and much appreciated to bringing me on. And I'm always free to do another one.
Thank you.
And shout out to El Lubo as well.
Thank you. Yes, shout out to Luba for making this happen. So thank you to our listeners, and it is Bim signing out, and thank you for joining us today on the BlueSitron Podcast. Thank you so much, and enjoy your day wherever you are. Enjoy your evening if it is evening for you, and have an amazing week ahead. Take good care. Bye-bye.